Stricken with a fever so high I could barely move, I asked my eldest son for a simple glass of water. I thought he would at least grant me that small request. Instead, he brought me a glass filled with beer, and to my shock, splashed it over me as I lay helpless in bed. From the doorway, I heard laughter. There stood my son's wife, clapping and giggling. My son, still holding the empty glass, was laughing too. I couldn't believe it. Though feverish and dazed, the image of that moment seared itself into my memory. "Make sure the house is clean by the time we get back, got it?" he demanded. Up until that point, I had endured Mark and his wife's selfish behavior, but I had finally reached my limit. "Yes, I'll clean it," I replied, forcing the words out through the pain in my throat so they could both hear. "My name is Helen, and I'm a 73-year-old housewife. My husband George is 75. Now retired, he teaches calligraphy to children at a local community center. He's been passionate about calligraphy since he was young and always dreamed of teaching it after retirement. Seeing him head to the community center every day, fulfilling his dream with a smile, brings me great happiness. We have 2 sons. Our younger son is married with 2 elementary school-aged children. However, our 44-year-old eldest son was still unmarried and living at home with us. He works part-time at a convenience store at night, but only about 4 days a week. He doesn't contribute financially to the household and spends most of his time lounging around. My husband and I have tried warning him numerous times, but our words seem to fall on deaf ears. Since he wasn't involved in gambling or in debt, we eventually gave up on trying to change him. Then, out of the blue, our eldest son announced, "I got married," and brought his new wife home without any prior introduction. She walked in as if she owned the place, and from that day on, I found myself preparing meals for her as well. I didn't mind cooking for my son's wife, but she never helped with anything, not even cleaning up after meals. She never said thank you and even had the nerve to demand a cup of coffee after dinner. My husband, unable to tolerate their behavior any longer, sternly reprimanded our son and his wife. After that, they stopped making unreasonable demands in front of him. However, whenever my husband was out, she would start again, saying things like, "Mother-in-law, please take this dress to the cleaners for me." I thought she was being overly selfish, and when I tried to confront her about it, my son took her side. "It's just something you can do on your way to shopping. Don't be so stingy," my son would say. Yet, despite living under our roof and eating the meals I prepare, neither he nor his wife contributes a penny to the household. Their demands felt increasingly unreasonable, and I considered discussing the situation with my husband. But not wanting to ignite a quarrel between him and our son, I decided to hold off for a bit longer. So once again, I kept quiet and, as my daughter-in-law requested, took her clothes to the cleaners. My husband and I usually visit our younger son's family in Canada about twice a year. We were planning another visit during the upcoming week-long federal holiday. We've built a close bond with our grandchildren through these visits, and they've grown quite fond of us. We'd already bought toys they love as gifts, and we were planning to pick up a roll cake as a treat on the way. Whenever we visit, we prefer taking the sleeper train instead of flying. The train journey allows us to relax and enjoy the passing scenery, which feels much more soothing now that we have the luxury of time. The view from a plane might be quicker, but it lacks the charm of watching the landscape change outside the train window. The day before our visit, I felt unusually excited. After seeing my husband off to his regular calligraphy class, I headed out to do some shopping, thinking about our upcoming trip. On my way back from shopping, I stopped by a bakery where they were selling handmade cookies. I thought these would last longer than a cake, so I picked up some for the grandchildren. As I envisioned their delighted faces, it started to drizzle. I quickened my pace, but the rain soon turned into a downpour. I decided to stop at a nearby convenience store to buy an umbrella. By the time I arrived, I was drenched through. I considered waiting for the rain to let up, but not knowing when it would end and eager to warm up with a hot bath, I bought an umbrella and hurried home. When I arrived home and was about to take a bath, my eldest son's wife came in and said, "Helen, are you about to bathe? I need to go out now, so let me use the bath first and start preparing dinner early, please." She then shut the bathroom door behind her, as if it were her own house. I changed clothes and began preparing dinner, trying to ignore her intrusion. As I worked, I started sneezing. I dreaded the thought of catching the cold right before our trip. Yet my eldest son's wife continued to linger in the bath for over an hour, showing no concern for my discomfort. The next morning, the day we were set to visit our second son's family, I woke up feeling sluggish. My throat was sore, my nose was running, and my temperature was 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Realizing that I had caught a cold from yesterday's rain, I told George he should go alone this time to avoid passing my illness on to the grandchildren. George suggested we cancel the trip, but since we already had the sleeper train tickets, we decided against it. We had also bought toys as gifts for the grandchildren, so I still wanted George to make the visit, even if it was just him. I gave him the cookies I had bought from the bakery the day before. Despite George's concerns, I reassured him that it was only a mild fever and cold, and that I would be fine after some medicine and rest at home. Normally, George doesn't speak much to our eldest son and his wife, but this time he made sure to inform them of my illness and insisted they take care of the housework while he was gone. After sending George off with a smile, I was about to return to bed when I overheard my eldest son and his wife talking. "Oh, what a hassle. It's just a cold, right? But now that Dad's gone, we can enjoy some freedom." I was stunned that they would speak this way, given they were living in our home without contributing to the household expenses. But their attitude was all too familiar. "You do realize the only reason you're able to live here is because of your father, right?" I pointed out, which seemed to offend them. Mark and his wife retorted, "We're doing you a favor by living with you in your old age." "That's right. Most people don't want to live with their in-laws," my daughter-in-law added. It was ironic that they, who had moved in with us uninvited, acted as if they were doing us a huge favor. Despite feeling unwell and wanting to rest, I ignored their remarks and went back to my room. Later that evening, my daughter-in-law came into my room and woke me up. "Mother-in-law, you're not planning to skip cooking just because you're a little sick, are you? You know I can't cook, right?" Hearing a 35-year-old woman say she can't cook and expects her mother-in-law to handle it even when she's unwell is beyond unreasonable. I was feeling sick and wanted them to manage on their own. Even George should have warned them before leaving this morning. I tried to ignore her and go back to sleep, but my daughter-in-law insisted on staying in my room. Knowing I needed to eat something light and take medicine, I reluctantly got up and went to the kitchen to prepare a simple meal. While I was cooking, Mark came home. Despite seeing me in the kitchen with a mask on, he didn't say a word, acting as if it was perfectly normal. To make matters worse, he demanded, "Hey, the bath isn't ready yet." It was clear they didn't care whether I was sick or not. Realizing they wouldn't be considerate anyway and wanting to rest as soon as possible, I finished preparing the meal and went to get the bath ready. When I returned to the living room, Mark and his wife were chatting animatedly while eating. "We're going on a trip abroad the day after tomorrow, so please don't spread your cold to us," Mark said casually. I was taken aback by their sudden mention of a trip abroad. I had no prior knowledge of their plans. Despite feeling unwell, I ate a light meal in the dining room, away from the warm living room, as my daughter-in-law suggested. The couple was excitedly discussing their upcoming 3-week trip to Europe, which Mark had scheduled by taking time off his part-time job. Although I hadn't been informed about their travel plans, I was relieved to know they wouldn't be home starting the day after tomorrow. On the morning they were set to leave for their trip, my cold had worsened to the point where I couldn't get out of bed. When I measured my temperature, I had a fever of nearly 103 degrees Fahrenheit. I was parched, but my headache was so intense that I could barely lift my head. In this state, Mark came into my room. "Hey, cook us some food. You can still cook even if you have a cold." Seeing my son demand that I cook while I was clearly ill brought tears to my eyes. I had endured their selfish behavior for far too long, but this was the breaking point. "Yes, I'll keep it clean," I managed to say with the little strength I had, despite the pain in my throat. With that, Mark and his wife left, and I was too exhausted to clean up the beer-soaked mess. I fell asleep as I was. When I woke up, I felt somewhat refreshed. My head was still groggy, but I noticed that I didn't feel sticky, and the covers on my bed had been changed. Just as I was trying to make sense of what had happened, George came in with a basin. Seeing me sitting up, he placed his hand on my forehead and asked, "Are you okay?" "Why is George here? Wasn't he supposed to be with our second son's family?" I tried to ask, but my voice barely formed the words. Noticing my confusion, George began to explain. He had traveled by sleeper train to visit our second son's family, but worried about my condition, decided to return early. He didn't trust Mark and his wife to look after me properly. Our second son's family also encouraged him to come back quickly, so he flew home. Upon arrival, he found me lying exhausted in bed with a lingering smell of beer. He immediately cleaned my face with a damp towel, tidied up the room, and took care of me while I rested for a full day. When George asked me what had happened, I tried to explain, but my voice faltered. The memory of Mark splashing beer on me brought tears to my eyes. Seeing my distress, George brought me some water and said, "Sorry, I shouldn't have asked you now. Just rest." He then went on to prepare porridge so that it would be ready whenever I woke up. George's kindness moved me deeply. Thanks to his care, I regained my strength in about 2 days. When I finally recounted the events to George, his face grew stern. "I can't stand it anymore," he said. "Neither can I agreed. 3 weeks had passed since Mark and his wife left for their overseas trip. While George and I were enjoying a peaceful time together, my phone rang. It was Mark. "Here it comes," I said, pressing the answer button. "What the hell? Why is our house gone?" Mark's voice was filled with disbelief. "Well, didn't you say to clean the house after I recovered from the cold?" I told George everything about Mark and his wife, how they forced me to cook while I was sick, how they threw beer on me when I was bedridden, and how they went on their trip without a second thought. After hearing my account, George muttered, "I can't stand it anymore." Until now, I had always been the one to calm George down. But after this incident, I couldn't bring myself to pacify him any longer. I was too hurt and angry to forgive our eldest son and his wife. In fact, George and I had been secretly planning to build a new house without informing them. Although the new house wasn't finished yet, we had moved into a rental apartment and sold our old house. We had managed to sell it quickly because someone wanted to buy the land for a new shop. Initially, we had intended to keep the old house for our eldest son and his wife, but their behavior had made it clear that we no longer owed them any consideration. When they found the old house had been turned into an empty lot, their shock was palpable. Our new house is expected to be completed in about 2 weeks. A carpenter George knows allowed us to store our belongings and furniture there ahead of time, given our situation. We disposed of all of our eldest son's and his wife's possessions. When we informed them, our eldest son erupted, shouting, "Are you kidding me? I'll report you to the police." His wife added her protests from the background. At that moment, George took over the phone and put it on speaker mode. He said in a calm, yet steely voice, "Go ahead, report us. I'll report you too. You threw beer at your sick mother and forced her to do housework while she was ill, and then you went on vacation abroad. Who do you think is the bigger sinner here, you or us for disposing of your belongings?" As George spoke, his face was resolute and unyielding. "This has nothing to do with that. Where are we supposed to live now? Where are you even staying?" Our son shouted back. George replied firmly, "That house was ours to sell. We had every right to do so. Besides, you're no longer our son. Don't contact us again." And then he ended the call. 2 weeks later, we received a call notifying us that our new house was ready. George and I went over to see it. The call had come from the carpenter, a friend of George's who was about 60 years old and a site supervisor. He gave us a tour of the house, explaining the layout. Designed as a single-story accessible home with our retirement in mind, it was even more beautiful than we had imagined. We were excited to move in. The furniture we had left in the living room had been moved by the carpenters, who assured us with a smile, "No problem. George helped us out back in the day, so this is nothing." George and I settled into our new home, finding it even more comfortable than we had anticipated. Life felt peaceful without the presence of our eldest son and his wife. However, about a month after our move, our troublesome eldest son and his wife showed up at our new address. We hadn't shared our new location with them, and our younger son Mark and his wife knew better than to disclose it, so they must have hired a detective or something to track us down. "Hey, it's not fair for you to sell the house, throw away our stuff, and then move into such a nice place without us. As your eldest son, I have a right to live here too, don't I?" he demanded, glaring at us with large bags in his hands. We were taken aback as it was clear they intended to move in. Just then, George emerged from the back of the house. "What are you doing here? What's the point of this?" After taking our home, How dare you ask that? From today, we're moving in too, they declared as they tried to enter. At that moment, the front door opened. Mark? What are you doing here? Causing trouble again? You're old enough to be responsible for yourself, said Stephen, looking incredulous. Beside him were his wife and their 2 grandchildren. They had come to visit the newly finished house and were returning from a nearby convenience store. Who are they? Are they bad people? Asked Sophia, the 5th grader, with innocent curiosity. As George prepared to deal with Mark and his wife, he suddenly had an idea. While Stephen's family was staying for the week, he told our eldest son and his wife, "You two can stay here as well, but don't think you can stay indefinitely." With that, Stephen welcomed everyone into the house. In the living room, Mark and his wife quickly made themselves comfortable on the sofa. "Man, I'm beat. Mother-in-law, could I get some coffee?" "I'll take mine black," Mark demanded. His casual request surprised Stephen's wife, and the grandchildren immediately reacted. "Why can't you two do that yourselves?" "Even I, a kid, can pour my own juice," said one of the grandchildren. Mark's wife looked uncomfortable and went to make her own coffee, but the grandchildren's questions didn't stop. "Why can't you cook, even though you're an adult woman?" "My mom can cook anything." "Why don't you clean up after yourself?" "Both my dad and I always clean the plates when we're done eating." "Why can't you do that?" "My sister and I always handle it ourselves." The grandchildren's comments reflected their good upbringing by Stephen and his wife, who worked together and were involved in household chores. Mark and his wife, in contrast, seemed to be clueless about these responsibilities. Initially, Mark and his wife tried to defend themselves, but the constant questioning wore them down. By the end of the week, they were visibly exhausted. Mark's wife, in particular, was taken aback when the children addressed her as Auntie. "Don't call me Auntie," she insisted, but the grandchildren responded with confusion. "Why not? You're an auntie, aren't you? You're not young enough to be called sister," they said, leaving both her and Stephen laughing, even though they tried to hide it. After Stephen and his wife left, we had Mark and his wife pack up and leave. They were so worn out from the grandchildren's relentless questioning that they didn't put up much of a fight. A few months later, however, we received a message from them asking, "Can you lend us some money?" Despite having lived in our home rent-free and eating our food without contributing, Mark and his wife had now been forced to handle their own expenses. Mark's salary from his part-time job at a convenience store should have been sufficient to cover their costs. But it seemed they were living beyond their means, relying on borrowed money without savings. Mark's wife had no intention of working, which made their requests for money even more audacious. We firmly told them, "We will never lend you money or assist you in any way," and then blocked Mark's number. A few days later, while we were out, my husband received a call from our home security company. They informed us that there was an intruder in our house and sent us video footage. To our shock, Mark and his wife were trying to break in through a window. It was disheartening to see them resort to such measures, breaking into their parents' home out of desperation. Although they didn't cause additional trouble, their actions were inexcusable. Security apprehended them on the spot, and the police, who were called to the scene, scolded them harshly before releasing them due to their familial relationship. Since then, Mark and his wife stopped attempting to break into our home. We had blocked their numbers, so we no longer received any calls from them. According to Stephen, our second son, Mark had also reached out to him asking for money. It turned out that Mark had borrowed money from loan sharks and was now fleeing because he couldn't repay his debts. Stephen's response was blunt. "You reap what you sow. Pay back the money you borrowed yourself," and he blocked Mark's number as well. We haven't heard from Mark or his wife since then. While we don't know what ultimately happened to them, we have chosen to move on from those who once poured beer over a sick person. My husband and I are now enjoying a tranquil life together. George, who used to teach calligraphy classes at the community center, now teaches at home in a specially designed room. When Stephen and his family visit, the grandchildren and other children join in the classes and have a great time making new friends. We are deeply grateful for these peaceful days and cherish every moment.